In the late 1990s, parents in Belize City tucked their daughters in at night and prayed they'd wake up. 5 schoolgirls would never come home. The killer left no ransom notes, no calls, just bodies meticulously mutilated, as if by someone who knew exactly where to cut. FBI agents flew in, Scotland Yard joined, and then just as the city braced for the next strike, the murders stopped. No arrest, no confession, no closure. This is the story of the Belize Ripper and the 5 girls who vanished into the night. Between 1998 and 2000, these 5 young girls became the center of one of the most haunting investigations in Belize's history. It started with one disappearance, a worried family, a city searching its streets. Then a second girl vanished. By the time the third was found, Belize City realized it was facing something darker. A serial killer was among them. Each case carried the same terrifying signs. The victims were young schoolgirls, taken during ordinary moments of their day. The crimes were precise, so precise that investigators believed the killer had medical knowledge. As fear gripped the city, police patrols increased, and parents began escorting children everywhere. The FBI and Scotland Yard were brought in, combing through evidence, interviewing suspects, and trying to draw a profile of the murderer. And then, suddenly, it all stopped. The killings ended, but no one was ever arrested. The families never received answers. Today, more than 2 decades later, the Belize Ripper case remains unsolved, leaving 5 names echoing through Belize's history and a question that still haunts the nation. Who killed these girls, and why did they stop? Belize City in the late 1990s was a place where everyone knew everyone. Families lived close together, children shared uniforms, and neighbors looked out for one another. It wasn't the kind of place where you expected to hear about serial killings. But between 1998 and 2000, 5 families would face every parent's worst nightmare. Sherilee Nicholas, 13 years old, bright, cheerful, always seen walking home with her books tucked neatly under her arm. She never made it home one afternoon. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through her school, where teachers held special meetings to warn students about strangers. A few months later came Jackie Malic, just 12. Jackie was shy, soft-spoken, and loved drawing. When she didn't come back from running a quick errand, her family reported her missing immediately. Days later, the city learned the unthinkable. Jackie had been murdered. Then came Erica Wills, only 8 years old, the youngest of the victims. She was a playful child, known for laughing loudly on the playground. Her small size made her disappearance feel especially cruel. Noemi Hernandez, 14, was next. Noemi was independent, a fast walker, often trusted to run errands on her own. When her body was found, the city was already gripped by fear, and the similarities between the cases became impossible to ignore. And finally, Jay Blades, 9 years old. Jay's disappearance remains one of the most heartbreaking chapters of this story. Unlike the others, Jay was never found. No trace, no remains, just a sudden absence that left her family with nothing but questions. As the pattern emerged, investigators realized they weren't dealing with random crimes. They were hunting a serial killer. Police began working day and night. Patrol cars circled neighborhoods, and checkpoints were set up across the city. The media started referring to the unknown suspect as the Belize Ripper, a name that only deepened the fear spreading through the community. The victims' families spoke to reporters, pleading for justice, their faces becoming a constant presence on evening news broadcasts. Their grief was raw, public, and unrelenting, and it made the entire country pay attention. This wasn't just a crime spree. This was a calculated series of murders targeting children, and the entire city felt like it was holding its breath. At first, the city tried to carry on with normal life. Children still had to go to school, parents still had to work, and the streets of Belize City still bustled with market sellers, buses, and bicycles. But under the surface, something was changing. Parents began walking their children to school, even if it meant being late to work. Neighbors started watching the streets from their verandas, scanning for anyone they didn't recognize. People who used to leave their doors open now locked them before sunset. The relationship between the city and its own routines began to shift. Every sound, every stranger, every late bus became a potential warning sign. The police presence grew heavier. Patrol cars rolled slowly through neighborhoods. Officers stopped to question loiterers, checked ID cards, and posted notices with descriptions of the victims. But even with this heightened vigilance, the attacks continued. Fear crept into the schools as well. Teachers began giving safety talks, telling students to walk in pairs and avoid shortcuts. Some parents even pulled their children from class entirely, afraid to risk the walk to school. The murders created a strange tension. The killer was out there somewhere, and yet life couldn't completely stop. People had to keep living, but they were living differently. Conversation shifted, too. On buses and at markets, everyone had a theory. Was it a doctor? A foreigner? Someone from the community? Could it be someone they knew, someone they greeted every day? The more the city talked, the more anxious it became. Belize was small enough that everyone was connected, and that made the idea of a killer hiding in plain sight even more terrifying. This wasn't just about 5 victims anymore. This was about an entire city being forced to look over its shoulder, waiting for the next name to be added to the list. The fear didn't just live on the streets anymore, it started living inside people's homes. Families who once gathered on front porches stayed inside after dark. Children were no longer allowed to play outside without supervision. Even ordinary sounds, a knock at the door, a car stopping outside, began to feel threatening. Parents became watchful, sometimes overprotective, questioning every errand, every outing. Mothers insisted on walking their daughters to school. Fathers stayed up late, waiting to hear their children's footsteps at the door. In neighborhoods where everyone used to greet each other by name, suspicion began to creep in. People started wondering, could the killer be someone we know? Each new disappearance widened the distance between neighbors. Trust became fragile. People stopped talking freely, afraid of saying too much, or saying the wrong thing. Even the police felt the weight. Detectives worked around the clock, but the lack of solid leads was taking a toll. Tension built inside the force. The community wanted answers, and every day without progress felt like failure. The city's fear became almost physical. You could feel it in the air, hear it in the quiet streets after sundown. It was an invisible grip tightening a little more each time a name was added to the list. Saturday, November 16, 2000, the day that would mark the end of the killings. It was a quiet morning in Belize City. Children were out playing, markets were busy, and families were preparing for the weekend. For a brief moment, life almost felt normal again. But by afternoon, that calm was broken. When 14-year-old Noemi Hernandez didn't return home from a short errand, her family grew worried immediately. The city was already on edge, and every missing child report was treated like an emergency. By evening, police and neighbors were out searching, flashlights sweeping alleys, calling her name. Parents held their children closer, waiting for news that would either bring relief or confirm their worst fears. Hours later, the news came. Noemi's body had been found. The details were grim, the same careful precision, the same haunting signature that investigators had seen before. But this time, something felt different. The city's grief turned to rage. Crowds gathered near the crime scene, demanding answers. The media swarmed, reporting every rumor, every whisper about possible suspects. Police were stretched to their limits, trying to control both the investigation and a community that was losing patience. For detectives, this case became the line in the sand, the moment where solving the murders was no longer just a duty, but a desperate race to stop whoever was responsible before another girl was taken. That night, Belize City stayed awake. For investigators, the next 48 hours were critical. They knew that if they were ever going to catch the killer, it had to be now, before he disappeared again, before another child went missing. Detectives went door to door, canvassing neighborhoods, retracing Noemi's last known steps. They gathered DNA samples, interviewed potential witnesses, and compiled lists of anyone who might have crossed her path that day. But frustration set in quickly. Leads that looked promising unraveled. Witness accounts conflicted. Some people were too afraid to talk, worried about retaliation or false accusation. Behind closed doors, the task force pushed harder. They brought in new experts, re-examined old evidence, compared every detail of Noemi's case to the previous murders, hoping for the one clue that would finally connect them all. The media's coverage grew more intense by the hour. Talk shows debated possible suspects. Editorials demanded justice. The case wasn't just a police investigation anymore, it had become a national crisis. And through it all, Noemi's family grieved in public, their pain captured by cameras. They begged for answers, for justice, for this nightmare to end. But there would be no arrest. No suspect taken into custody. Instead, Belize City entered a strange new phase, one where the killer's shadow still loomed, but the killings themselves had stopped. Sunday morning came, but it brought no comfort. Belize City woke up to the headline everyone had feared. Another schoolgirl murdered. Churches filled that day, pastors praying for safety, for justice, for answers. Police worked non-stop, fueled by the urgency of stopping a killer who could strike again at any moment. They gathered suspects, interrogated neighbors, and even called in tips from outside the city. But every promising lead seemed to collapse under scrutiny. One man was briefly detained after a neighbor claimed he had been seen near the crime scene. Hours later, he was released, his alibi airtight. Another lead pointed to a visiting foreigner, but immigration records proved he had left the country weeks before the murder. The delays frustrated the community. Parents demanded to know why, after 5 girls, no one was in custody. Some began to accuse the police of incompetence, even corruption, suspecting that the killer might be protected by someone powerful. Meanwhile, detectives privately admitted they were running out of options. Evidence was thin, forensics were limited by the technology of the time, and the killer, whoever he was, seemed to anticipate every move investigators made. The tension in the city boiled over. Rumors spread faster than facts. Innocent men were accused in whispers, some even threatened. It felt as though fear had turned neighbor against neighbor. And then, just as the city braced for another tragedy, there was silence. Days passed, weeks, months, and no new victims appeared. It was as if the killer had simply vanished. Monday, November 18, 2000, just 2 days after Noemi's murder, the phones at police headquarters wouldn't stop ringing. Tips came from every corner of Belize City. Some callers claimed to have seen suspicious men near the scene. Others pointed to neighbors, co-workers, even family members. Each call was logged, each lead followed. One tip, in particular, caught the attention of investigators. A man who allegedly matched the profile, seen loitering near a schoolyard earlier that week. Police tracked him down, questioned him for hours. He denied any involvement and provided a timeline for his entire day. By nightfall, he was cleared. There were other moments of hope, a footprint that seemed to match one found in a previous case. A witness who said she heard crying near the alley where Noemi was last seen. But when the evidence was tested, nothing connected them. Detectives faced a brutal truth. Despite their best efforts, the trail was already growing cold. International agencies were still on the ground. FBI profilers met with local detectives, analyzing behavioral patterns, suggesting new lines of questioning. Scotland Yard assisted with case comparisons, hoping to link the killings to similar cases abroad. But no matter how hard they pressed, no suspect emerged strong enough to charge. That Monday marked the beginning of an agonizing shift, from active pursuit to reluctant waiting. The city was still raw with grief, still expecting another attack, but there were no new murders, no new disappearances. For the families, that silence was the cruelest part. No answers, no justice, just empty rooms and unanswered questions. In the months and years that followed, investigators kept chasing every lead they could find. Some tips came from abroad, people who claimed to have overheard confessions or met someone who fit the profile. Others came from local sources, pointing to doctors, teachers, even police officers. One man, a well-known medical professional, became a major suspect. His knowledge, his access, his schedule, it all seemed to fit. The community waited for an arrest. But when the case was brought before a judge, the evidence wasn't strong enough. The suspect was released, and the investigation stalled again. Each false lead took a toll. Detectives were pulled off other cases, families were left waiting for updates that never came, and the public's trust in the process began to fray. Over time, rumors turned into theories. Some believed the killer had fled Belize. Others were convinced he was still living quietly in the city, blending in with the crowd. By the mid-2000s, the case was no longer headline news. Files were boxed up, stored in evidence rooms. Detectives who had once been consumed by the search were reassigned. But every so often, the case would flare back to life. A new witness would come forward. A new detective would take interest. A fresh review of DNA would be ordered. Each time, hopes rose. And each time, those hopes faded when no new suspect was named. The Belize Ripper case slowly became one of the country's great unsolved mysteries. The murders stopped, but the questions never did. For the families, the lack of answers was almost harder than the loss itself. They were left not only to grieve, but to wonder, every day, if the person who took their daughters was still walking free. There was no sentencing, no courtroom where the families could face the person responsible, no verdict that could bring closure. Instead, Belize City was left with an open wound. The aftermath of the Belize Ripper case reshaped the country in quiet but lasting ways. Parents became more cautious, keeping children closer to home. Schools adopted stricter rules about students walking alone. Community watch programs began forming, neighbors looking out for neighbors, trying to ensure nothing like this would ever happen again. For the victims' families, the grief never left. Birthdays came and went, chairs stayed empty at dinner tables, and milestones were missed. Some families moved away from Belize City, unable to pass the places that reminded them of what they had lost. Others stayed, turning their pain into advocacy, pushing for better policing, better forensic tools, and more resources for missing children cases. The case also left a mark on Belizean law enforcement. It pushed for improvements in investigative methods, crime scene processing, and record keeping. Young detectives still study the Belize Ripper files as a reminder of the cost of failure and the importance of catching these cases early. But even with progress, the question remains, who did this? Each time an anniversary comes, the names are spoken again: Sherilee, Jackie, Erica, Noemi, and Jay. The city remembers not only their loss, but the fear that spread through every street, every household. And somewhere, perhaps even now, the person responsible may still be alive. That possibility keeps the case open, and keeps Belize City looking over its shoulder. 5 girls: Sherilee, Jackie, Erica, Noemi, Jay. Their names are more than a case file, more than statistics. They were daughters, sisters, classmates, friends. The Belize Ripper case remains one of the country's darkest unsolved mysteries, but unsolved does not mean forgotten. Somewhere out there, someone knows what happened. Someone has seen something, heard something, remembers something that could finally bring closure. If you have any information about these cases, even the smallest detail, you can still come forward. Contact the Belize Police Department or local authorities, because for these 5 families, closure has never come. And until it does, the question remains, who killed these girls, and why did they stop? The city of Belize still waits for the answer. And if you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Your support helps keep these cases alive.